Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we like to light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish tradition or text. We also host a Clubhouse at 7 p.m. Thursday nights Eastern, where we have disruptive Madlik Torah. And tonight I am joined with Rabbi Adam Mintz, and we are going to discuss the metamorphosis of Jacob, who turns into Israel by fighting, arguing, struggling with an angel. So get yourself into, debating mode where we discuss arguing with God and man. Welcome to another week of Madlik. The parsha is Vayishlach, and we have the story of Jacob coming back to the land of Israel. He's about to cross the Jordan, and because we are all a product of our past, now he has to confront his past. He has to confront his brother Esau, who, if you remember, he swindled out of a birth blessing, and now he comes with a family. He's a family man. He's gotten some wealth to him, but he is basically fearful for his life. And we are going to focus on that moment before he comes and crosses the Jordan River, and he's alone at night. He sent his family, split them up into two camps to protect them, and now is alone on the bank of the Jordan and confronts an angel. So in Genesis 32 it says, "Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your native land, and I will deal bountifully with you. I am unworthy of all the kindness you have steadfastly shown. Your servant with my staff alone I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, else I fear he may come and strike me down, mother and children alike. Av al banim." And then he goes on and he says, after taking them across the stream, he sent them all his possessions. Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." Said he, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine and human and have prevailed." Jacob asked, "Pray tell me your name." But he said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave of him. So Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning, I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved. Then the sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping on his hip. That is why the children of Israel to this day do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the socket of the hip, since Jacob's hip socket was wrenched at the muscle. So this is the source of why Jews cannot eat filet mignon. So already we have a wonderful takeaway. But the real question is this striving, this struggling with this angel, and the name change to Israel. And the name Israel literally implies struggling with man and God. So you can't even say that this is a subtext or a subplot. When someone's name is changed, and that name means to struggle with God and man, that's pretty profound. Are we, the B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, are we a little argumentative? Are we strugglers? Is that the takeaway from this? Is this a key characteristic of the Israelite Jewish story?
I think the answer is yes. I think that Jews throughout the ages have liked the impression that the Jews struggle. That goes with Jews being a minority. Jews are a minority. We always have to struggle. And therefore, even though obviously the name change goes back to the Torah, I think it's a name change that has resonated with Jews throughout history. And I think that's kind of interesting when you think about it.
There's a famous saying in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, that says, a machloket l'shem shamayim, an argument that is for the sake of heaven will endure forever. But one that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. And anyone who has studied, whether it's the Mishnah, whether it's the Talmud, the oral law, which is actually an oral law, it is a transcript of literal arguments between our rabbis. And those of you who, like myself, has studied in a traditional yeshiva know that when you walk into the study hall of a traditional academy of Jewish learning, of a yeshiva, it is the absolute opposite of walking into a library, which is calm and quiet. A yeshiva, the din of students arguing amongst themselves, they call it the cold Torah, is overwhelming, but in a sense, because everyone is arguing, there's a silence as well. You can actually focus and concentrate. But that truly is a real element of argument and conflict of ideas and passions deeply rooted in our tradition.
That is correct. The rabbis say in the Talmud that there's nothing better than students arguing with one another when they're studying Torah. That's part of the experience of studying Torah, is being able to argue with one another. And I think that's a very strong idea. And what's interesting about the name Israel is the fact that the Torah says that Jacob struggled with God and with man. And the question is what the significance of that is. Actually, the one he's struggling with is the angel. But the angel seems somehow to represent Esau, who's the one he's about to confront. So there seems to be two parallel stories, almost like two parallel train tracks going on here. One is the experience of Jacob and the angel, and the other is the experience of Jacob and Esau. And I wonder what we make about the combination of those two stories here.
Before I get to my understanding of what he means by struggling with man, I want to make us very current. There was a book written about 10 years ago, and it's called Startup Nation. And it tries to address why Israel per capita has so many entrepreneurs, has so many startups. And in the preface, it talks about a few Israelis who are sitting in a conference room and arguing amongst themselves at the top of their lungs about who knows what, some minutia of how to program or start their company. And the American colleague who views this and then sees these same people that had been deep in argumentation go have a drink later and laugh and hug each other was was amazed by it. And the same thing applies to the Israeli army, where there's this lack of recognition of this anti-hierarchical respect. And they both go to this sense of you can argue with anybody. And he writes something rather interesting, and I'll quote. So when he asked Major General Fakash why Israel's military is so anti-hierarchical and open to questioning, he told us it was not just the military, but Israel's entire society and history. Our religion is an open book, he said, in a subtle European accent that traces back to his early teens in Transylvania. The open book he was referring to was the Talmud, a dense recording of centuries of rabbinic debates over how to interpret the Bible and obey its laws. And the corresponding attitude of questioning is built into Jewish religion as well as into the national ethos of Israel. An Israeli author, Amos Oz, has said, Judaism and Israel have always cultivated a culture of doubt and argument, an open-ended game of interpretations, counter-interpretations, reinterpretations, opposing interpretations. From the very beginning of the existence of the Jewish civilization, it was recognized by its argumentativeness. And I quote that, picking up on your comment about this sense of arguing with God and arguing with man. And there's no question that deep in our essence, in our core, is this sense of taking the other position, of looking at an alternative approach. And whether it is he's talking about his potential future confrontation with his brother Esav, or the years that he spent working for his father-in-law and striving against a man who at every turn was out to get him, I think that in our case, Yaakov, really did have under his belt the ability to say, I have striven with man and I have striven with God and I have prevailed.
I think that's right. And I think that Jacob, more than any, Jacob is always identified as the first Jew in exile, the first diaspora Jew, because Abraham is basically in the land of Canaan and Isaac never leaves the land of Canaan. But Jacob, his whole life is with Laban and then with Esav, and it's a life of struggle. We often don't think about the story here, but Jacob has another confrontation in the city of Shechem when his daughter Dinah is raped. And that's a very difficult story because his sons take revenge against the city, the people of Shechem, and Jacob seems to get angry at the sons for embarrassing him, and the sons seem to get angry back at Jacob, which is just a very interesting back and forth there about what's going on. What exactly is Jacob's place in the diaspora? Jacob always seems to be struggling, and just to look forward to next week, what's interesting is when Jacob finally gets settled back at home, that's when he has real trouble, because that's when he favors his son Joseph, and that's when Joseph is hated by the brothers and sold, and the whole story of Egypt begins. So actually, Jacob has a hard time, we would say in today's language, figuring it out, I think.
So in other words, it doesn't end.
That's my read of from here to the end of the book of Genesis. It doesn't really end. Jacob has trouble, and more than anything, Jacob struggles. Is he victorious? I don't know if he's victorious. He's victorious. The rabbis want to make him victorious. The rabbis are very proud of Jacob because Abraham has Ishmael and Isaac has Esau. But Jacob, all his children are true to his tradition. So, in a sense, they want to make it seem as if Jacob is somehow superior to his father and grandfather. But I don't know that that's so clear or so simple.
So I want to pick up on this concept of argument is the essence of the Jewish people. I mean, again, the fact that we are called Israel, which means striving with God and man, according to the verses that we just read, you can't ignore that. So there's a wonderful book, and it's called Arguing with God, A Jewish Tradition by Anson Leitner. And he literally writes a whole book about this concept. And you have heard me speak previously about how we now know from ancient Near Eastern texts this whole concept of making a covenant and stuff like that. What he picks up from similar ancient texts is there is a whole tradition of what he calls this prayer of arguing with God. And what he does is he talks about how it's called the law court pattern of prayer. It's literally taking a God to court. And of course, what the Jews did with that was because their relationship with their God was so unique and they only had one God, it was taking the single God to court. And of course, that makes a paradigm shift because you can't play one God against another. And I think as we look at different examples that the author brings, I think we'll see stuff that really resonates that we've all heard about. But I want to start with one of the texts that he brought that actually relates to the argument, or I should say the thoughts that Jacob shares with us today. If you recall, when I read a second ago, Jacob split up his family into two, and he said, whether musing to himself or to God, that he says, I fear he may come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. Aim al banim. And the Midrash pipes in and explains that he is actually, in a sense, taking God to court here. And what he's saying, and I quote Parshat Rabbah 76, he says, I fear he may come, strike me down, mothers and child alike. But you said, Jacob says to God, if along the road you chance upon a bird's nest in any tree or on ground with fledglings or eggs, and the mother sitting over the fledglings or in the eggs, do not take the mother together with her young. There is a law in Deuteronomy that literally prohibits you from taking the eggs out of a nest while the mother bird is still on it. Somehow it broke with the moral, the ethical aesthetic of the Bible. There's another law that said, he may come and strike me down, mothers and child alike, but you wrote, you have written in your Torah, do not kill a cow or ewe and its young on the same day. So again, according to this Bereshit Rabbah, Jacob is also referring to a law in Leviticus that says you cannot, again, for this same moral aesthetic reason, kill a mother and child cow on the same day. There's something about uprooting any sense of continuity among any species that rankles the ethics of the Torah. And it goes on to say, if this wicked one, Esau, comes and destroys all at once, what will happen to your Torah, which in the future you will give on Mount Sinai? Who will read it? I entreat you, deliver me from his hand, that he will not come and kill both mother and child together. So the author of this book has multiple examples. We're going to visit a few through history where this Jewish concept of taking God to task, quoting his own Torah. And this is something that the author feels, in any case, is unique in the Jewish religion. Rabbi, do you feel that that is something that is unique to us?
That's a good question. I don't know the other traditions well enough to answer that question. I can just say that it is a very striking, aspect of Judaism. Calling God to task is a fascinating idea. The fact that, we have all these examples, Abraham calling God to task about destroying stone and, really trying to negotiate with God. The idea of negotiating with God is such a crazy notion. How can you negotiate with God? But Abraham feels comfortable enough to negotiate with God. So I think the fact that we're willing to take God to task is something that is very striking. I'll just add to that idea of taking God to task. There's another rabbinic idea, and that's the idea that God suffers with us. That when we suffer, God suffers together with us. And that also is, we take God to task, but God, it's not as if God's our enemy. God is with us. And even God, when we go into exile, God goes into exile with us. So we take God to task, and God responds in a way that really is very compassionate.
Absolutely. Almost God's there with us. The other thing that we have touched upon in the past is that much about Genesis is a forecast of what will happen in Exodus, going down into Egypt in the case of Abraham and Sarah and even Jacob. And it occurs to me that Jacob here crossing the Jordan is identical to Moses about to cross the Jordan. But unlike many of the other precursors, I think that the story is slightly different because Jacob is allowed to cross the Jordan with his people, and Moses is not. And I think, again, another example of this argument with God can be found in Devarim Rabbah. And this is what the words are put into Moses' mouth. And Moses says, Master of the universe, the labors and pains which I have devoted to making Israel believe in your name are manifold and known to you. To what trouble I have gone with them in connection with the precepts in order to fix them Torah and precepts thought. Just as I have witnessed their woe, so too I would behold their reward. But now that reward of Israel has come, and you say to me, you shall not go over this Jordan. And here's where Moses gives his argument. Behold, you made a fraud of your own Torah. As it is written, you must pay him his wages on the same day, before the sun sets, for he is needy and urgently depends upon it, else he will cry to the Lord against you, and you will incur guilt. Is this the reward I get for 40 years' labor that I went through in order that Israel should become a holy and faithful people? So here Moses is taking the law that you have to pay a laborer the money that you owe him before you go to sleep. You can't let the sun set without paying him. And Moses is saying, I suffered with these people for 40 years. I paid my dues, and now you won't pay me what is owed to me. And again, it's an amazing argument, but I think in the sense it becomes even more profound because we have to grapple with why Jacob was allowed to cross over into the Jordan. I mean, Jacob, if you look at the text, both this week and last week, Jacob makes a very similar argument. He says, I worked with Laban. I worked for 7 years for one wife, 7 years for another. He gets to Esau and he goes, I know you are concerned about me having the blessing, but I worked for everything that I show you today. I paid my dues. And he is somehow allowed to cross the Jordan, but Moses, who makes this type of argument that I think only B'nai Israel could make, is somehow not allowed. So my question is, my comment is twofold. Number one, why was Moses not successful in his request? But two, this sense of argumentation, of literally just as Jacob was able to hold the angel and say, I will not let you go until you bless me, is a tradition that starts, as you say, from Abraham and goes all the way through Moses, and we'll see in a second throughout Jewish history. It's very profound.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the answer is very profound. How do you take it as it relates to Jacob specifically? What do you think? What do you think the fact that this is true about Jacob and that we're called Israel? What does that mean for us going through history?
Well, I think it certainly gives us a license, if not an obligation, to argue and to take our God to task. It's a very fine line who this angel is. At some point, he's called Elohim. At some point, you could come to understand him as to be man. But definitely, somehow by the end of the story, and Jacob is obviously a person who throughout his life is looking for blessings. He's looking for recognition. He's looking for someone to say, you are your own person. But nonetheless, Jacob does achieve that. He can't forget his past. It's not going to go away from him. But the legacy that he gives to his children and to the world is this, I would say, not only license, but an obligation to struggle and to argue with one's God. It enables him, I think, to get across the Jordan and get into the promised land. And so he is successful where maybe Moses was not.
Yeah, so the idea that he gives permission, that I think is a very critical idea, that Jacob is actually the one who gives us permission to challenge God. And that throughout history, Jews have challenged God as the descendants of Jacob. And that's what we do. We challenge God. I mean, we ask, where was God? Where was God in the Holocaust? Where was God when young children are killed in terrorist attacks in Israel? Where was God? And that's what you're really saying correctly, is that's what Jacob did in a way. In challenging the angel, is he's challenging God. I wonder why the rabbis say that the angel was the angel of Esau. What do they gain by that?
I hadn't really seen that. But whether the angel was the angel of God or whether the angel was the angel of Esau, where Jacob becomes Israel is by standing on his own feet and standing up to him. And, I think this concept of arguing with God almost transcends a standard belief in God. In the texts and the traditions that the author that I quoted before brings, he brings poetry written and prayers written during the Holocaust and after the Holocaust. And you mentioned the Holocaust, and you know that is a tipping point in a sense. And I'd like to read just a little poem written by somebody called Jacob Gladstein that he quotes. And I'm not sure the person who writes it can anymore believe in God. But I almost, when I read it, I picture Jacob sitting after fighting the angel, giving thought to everything he's come through, all of the losses that he's had. And here's what he writes, and it's really about God and this person sitting in the DP camp. And he writes, I love my sad God, my brother refugee, love to sit down on a stone with him and tell him everything wordlessly, because when we sit like this, both perplexed, our thoughts flow together in silence. My poor God, how many prayers I've profaned, and how many nights I've blasphemed him and warned my frightened bones at the furnace of the intellect. And here he sits, my friend, his arm around me, sharing his last crumb. The God of my unbelief is magnificent, now that he's human and unjust. How I love my unhappy God. How exalted is this proud pauper, now that the merest child rebels against his word. And I really see in this words Jacob sitting with the angel after fighting all night, and they're both breathless and out of any strength, and they just put their arms around each other. And it's an amazing picture. I had a professor of philosophy at Columbia, Sidney Morgenbesser, and he was in great pain before he died. And one of his students came to him and he said, "Why is God making me suffer so? Do you think it's punishment for me not believing in him?"
Really?
He said that, and he's quoted as saying that. But again, it has this same tension that we of Israel are obliged to struggle with our God, and that, in a sense, is our essence. It's just fascinating.
That is correct. It is just fascinating that becomes our essence. And your essence is always your name. We always say that, right? You know, names mean a lot. And the fact that we are named the children of Israel means a lot. That, you know, that shows that our essence is that we're made to struggle. You know, they often talk about, you talked at the beginning about what it's like to be in yeshiva. And, you know, the argumentation, that goes on. But that's our personality. We argue with one another and we challenge everybody. We even challenge God. Isn't that an amazing thing? We argue with one another and we even argue with God.
I think it is amazing, and the most fascinating takeaway that I have taken away from this, and I haven't seen it written anywhere else, is I started by saying that the outcome of this story is that the Jewish people do not eat filet mignon. They do not eat that part of the animal that has the sciatic nerve in it, because Jacob walked away from this battle with a limp. And what's fascinating is there is really no commandment from God that we not eat this piece of meat. The verse says, "That is why the children of Israel to this day do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the socket of the hip." And what's amazing to me is this is a commandment that possibly does not come from God. Is it one of our 613 commandments? Yes, it is. But where does it come from? It comes from Israel, the Jewish people, and it's a sense of when you come out of that struggle and you limp away and you fought with man, but more importantly in this context, you fought with God. Therefore, until this day, we Jews, maybe it's our commandment versus God, where we remind our God in within ourselves or a God out there, that we have struggled with him or her. We continue to struggle with him or her, but it is a commandment that comes from us. I mean, how many times in Genesis does it say there were 7 wells and therefore until today it is called Beersheba? It's not a commandment, it's a point of fact. But in this particular case, the fact that Jews, Israelites, B'nai Israel, do not eat from this piece of meat is a testament to our willingness and our need and our obligation to strive with God and man.
That, I think, is a beautiful note with which to end this discussion. Next week is Vayishlach. It's right before Hanukkah. Let's have a great discussion next week. Thank you. Welcome back, Geoffrey. This was a really good discussion this week. And Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. And we look forward to seeing you all next Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, to talk about Vayishlach.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Shabbat all in
Shalom.
one.
Be well.
Bye-bye.